Okay, so we're starting the third chapter on Daf Chav Tasamad Aleph 29a1. Let's just go through the psukim. If you go to the page before in the art scroll, they have the psukim. I'm going to read them inside with Rashi. So in Perik Chav Beis, Pasuk Chav Ches, in Parshas Kiseitze, Ki yimtza ish na'ara b'sula shelo orasa utvasav shechavima v'nimtzo. When a man will find a virgin maiden who was not engaged, she had not been betrothed, and he grabs her and he lays with her, and they're found. The man who laid with her will give the father of the maiden 50 silver coins. And she will be his wife in place of the fact that he had relations with her. He's not allowed to send her away all of his days. So this isn't a punitive thing, but since she's no longer a virgin, she may not be able to get married anymore. So if she's okay with it, she'll be married to this guy, and he's not allowed to divorce her. So there's no Rashi's on this pasuk. So we're going to learn, this is a very unique halacha. I'm mixing it up with Motzi Shemra. And then in Mishpatim, in Shemos, Perik Chav Beis, Pasuk Tezvav, V'chi chifata ish besula shel arasav shechavima, mohori merenda lo leisha. When a man will seduce a virgin who is not betrothed and laid with her, mohori merenda lo leisha. So let's hold on translating mohori merenda lo leisha for a moment. If her father refuses to give her to him, kesef yishkol kamor habasulos. He has to pay silver. So kamohar is basically, I think, according to the Tartamima, mohar is one of the. He has a whole list of Aramaic words that are in the Torah. But kamohar habasulos is basically the basically what we will call the ksuva rate, even though this isn't talking about a ksuva, for a basula, because normally a basula would get a ksuva of 100 shekel, and now that she's not a basula, now that she's not a virgin, she'd only get 50, so you'd have to pay the difference. The Torah here doesn't say 50, but Rashi says that. So Onkelos says that the word mahor yimarena in the first pasuk is from the word, in Hebrew, the word maher is hurry, but this seems to be a different word, even though it's spelled the same way. Onkelos translated as they should be established as man and wife, basically, meaning he should marry her. And mohar in the second one is the monetary rate for a basula. So Rashi says for the seducer, ish. So he seduces her. Rashi says medaber aliba achashamas lo, v'chein turgamo v'arei yishtal. He speaks to her heart until she listens to him, and that's similarly the way Onkelos translated. Shado b'lashon arami kepitoy b'lashon ivri. So the word shado that the Targum uses is like the word of pit v'chefata ish, is, he sweet talks her until she agrees. Mahor yim harena. So we said that Onkelos translated they have to be established as man and wife, I mean they have to get married. But Rashi says mohor yim harena yifsuk lo mohar. He has to set a mohar. when the mohar is the value of getting married. According to the law of man and a wife, that he writes her a ksuva and marries her. So Rashi's not Rashi and Onkelos aren't necessarily arguing, but I guess the question is, what exactly is the word mohar? So Rashi says they're getting married by writing a marriage contract. And that's the context of the word mohar. Onkelos says they have to get married, but he doesn't mention in terms of the marriage contract. The Rashi in the next pasuk, Kamar Habasulos, the marriage value rate that a virgin gets her, who cuts of nun kesav eitzel tov, says absula v'shohavim ba'ones. It's a set amount of 50 silver coins for someone who grabs a virgin and lays with her with force. As it says in Devarim, which is what we just read a few moments ago, and the Gemara in Kesuvos says that, and I believe the source in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash is the wrong Gemara, the wrong daf. Okay, so those are. So basically, in these cases, the man pays a fine of $50 silver coins. So the Mishnah, we'll read the Mishnah, and then the Gemara is going to tell us what's going on, because the Mishnah kind of doesn't make so much sense. So on Chavtas Amud Aleph, Elu Naros Sheyesh Lehem Knas. These are the young women. We'll talk about what a Nara is. But basically, I guess a katana is a girl is a katana from the time she's born until she develops certain samanim, certain physical characteristics. I wouldn't say the word symptom, but physical characteristics of what we call puberty. And then for 6 months, she has a status of a Nara. And then 6 months after she is a Nara, she becomes a Bogeres. And there's different halachos in regard to these things. So let's say a father, in the times when we had servitude, he could sell his daughter to be a servant only while she was a katana, and she would go free when she would become a Nara. Once, or he could accept kedushin. He could marry her off while she's a katana, but once she's a Nara, she could accept her own kedushin. And basically, once she's a Nara, that's basically what we call bas mitzvah. She becomes an adult when she reaches the stage of Nara. So these are the Naros. So Rashi points out that these halachos, these two halachos that we read in the Chumash, these only apply to a Nara, not a Bogeres, who's approximately 12 and a half, 6 months after she showed the signs of puberty, and not a Katana. So there's only approximately a 6 month gap where if either of these situations would happen, that the violator, the man, would pay the fine of 50 shekel, or at least in the case of in Mishpatim of the Mafata, the seducer, if he doesn't get married to her, he pays the fine. These are the Naros, the maidens, that there is knas if they get seduced or raped, pretty much. Habala mamzeres. So if the girl was a mamzeres, either that she was born from a illicit union of either of adultery or of incest, so she's a mamzeres, or if either of her parents was a mamzer, the violator, the man, would still pay the fine. So a nasin is originally was a group of people who converted in the time of Yoshua, and Yoshua, whether he didn't think that they were going to be good converts or not, he said they were going to be wood choppers and water drawers. So kind of, I guess the word will be an underclass a little bit. And then later, Chazal said that they have a status similar to mamzers. So we don't say that they're not Jewish, but they have basically a status of kind of like a doubtful mamzer. So a regular Jew can't marry them, but they're not a full blown mamzer, and I don't think they're allowed to marry a mamzer either, because a mamzer is a definite mamzer and a nasan isn't, so they wouldn't be allowed to marry each other. V'ala kusis. So the kusim were some type of people. I don't know if they were in the region that is called Samaria, and they had dreams or something, or they were being attacked by lions, and they decided to convert because they thought if they would convert, the lions would stop. So it's a machlokus in the Gemara if their conversions were because if you convert for an ulterior motive, it's not a good conversion. So it was a machlokus in the Gemara or in the Mishnah if they were good converts or not. And Rashi says at this point the Gemara is assuming that they were not pure Gerim. They converted because of just so that the lions would stop attacking them. And then whatever later they found that they still had their avodah zaras on their mountain. So Chazal said that they weren't Jewish anymore. And according to the Keren Ora in Yevamos, Chazal actually said, even if their conversions were good, we are annulling their conversions. I mean, the bad part of that is that there are people nowadays who want to annul people's conversions just based on who the rabbi was, and that's not at all what Chazal did. But also, the Keren Ora only says it that Chazal, who are part of what we would say the Rambam lists the 40 generations from Moshe Rabbeinu till the end of the Gemara, that they were considered the head of Torah Shabbal Peh, they had that right to annul the conversion. But after that, the Rambam himself couldn't have annulled a conversion. So even though the Kusim, so Rashi says because they were not good converts, they would be part of in the negative commandment of Los Ischatin. So there's a big important machlokus rishonim, or it's actually machlokus in the Mishnah and machlokus rishonim how we paskin. If Los Ischatin, so Los Ischatin is in Parshas Veschana. We read it the Shabbos after Tisha B'av, and Los Ischatin basically is the prohibition against intermarriage. But it's a machlokus if Los Ischatin is specifically to the seven. I don't know if I should use this word or not. The seven, well, I shouldn't use the word indigenous because they weren't indigenous. The seven nations who lived in Eretz Canaan at the time that Bnei Yisrael captured it, they weren't indigenous there. They were just the ones who lived there. So whether it's talking about them, whether it's talking about all non-Jews, and if it's talking about those seven nations, is it after they convert, if they would convert to Judaism, which you're supposed to kill them, when Bnei Yisrael were fighting them. So the fact that Rashi says that they're included in the negative commandment of Los Ischatin shows that he holds it applies to non-Jews who are not of the seven nations. The Habala Giores, if a man either seduced or raped a convert, or a girl who had been held captive by non-Jews, which was a big topic of the previous parak, or she was a non-Jewish slave, a shifcha, but she was redeemed, and then whether the conversion or this former slave girl, once she was freed, they converted and they were freed when they were less than 3 years old and 1 day old, they have knas. So the person would pay, the man would pay 50 coins. So the reason is that in these cases, the Torah says basula, they have to be a virgin. And the halacha is that if, and it's difficult for us to conceive of such a case, to think of such a case that if a girl's hymen would be ruptured before she's 3 years old in one day, according to the halacha, it would regrow. It would grow back. So she would still be considered a basula. She would still be considered a virgin. So any of these cases, so mamzeris and asina and kusis, or a convert gioris shvuy and shivcha, if they converted or was freed from being a shivcha, or was held captive before they were 3 years old in one day, even if their hymen would have been broken, halachically it's considered to have grown back. So they would have a status of a basula, of a virgin. Excuse me. So therefore, because these halachas apply to a nara, so she's going to be 12 years old, but she has to be a virgin. So in these cases, these girls, when they would become 12 years old, would be virgins, unless something else happened. So there's a list of incestual cases over here. If someone had relations with his sister or his father's mother, meaning his father's sister, meaning his paternal aunt, or his maternal aunt, his mother's sister, Yalachos Ishto, or his wife's sister, Bel Eishes Achiv, or his brother's wife, Bel Eishes Achi Aviv, or the wife of his father's brother. So even though it's not his paternal aunt, but it's his paternal uncle's wife, Vial Hanida, and a woman who is impure from the state of Nida, Yesh Lahem Knas, Afapi Shehin Bikares. Ein Behem Misas Basin. Even though these cases, he will get kares for that avera, but he still pays because there's no Misas Basin. So this Mishnah at the end is saying is that we're going to see, and that's a big topic in this chapter, is that there's a principle called kamle b'rabamine. Normally, if someone does something for which there's multiple punishments, you would only get one punishment, and you would get the strictest punishment. If there would be a death penalty and a monetary, for example, if someone would shoot someone else, they ruined his shirt, and they killed him, but he's going to be exempt for paying for the shirt because the events happen at the same time, even if it's a millisecond apart. It's happened at the same time. So the stricter punishment would be getting killed for the act of murder. So he wouldn't pay money for the restitution of the shirt. Or we'll see in the Gemara soon, if you, it's not so simple, but if you would burn down someone's field on Shabbos, so you're chayv misa for being machal Shabbos, you wouldn't have to pay the monetary restitution for damaging the person's field because you only get one punishment. But when's that true is when Beis Din is meting out both punishments. But in these cases of incest that the Torah mentioned, and the case of Nida, those have a punishment of kares, not Beis Din. So therefore, Beis Din is only going to enforce one penalty against the person of the payment. So even though they did an act for which they deserve two punishments, a kares and a monetary payment, because the death is not being imposed by the Beis Din, it's being imposed by Hashem with kares. So they have to pay, even though in general you would be exempt from having to get two punishments. Now, the fact that the Mishnah mentions Nida in these cases would imply that Nida has a state of erva. So these cases of incest and married woman adultery, they have in halacha we call them arayos, which is the word in the Torah erva, like we read about in Yom Kippur afternoon, but we call them arayos. So Nida is different than all the other arayos because once a Nida goes to the mikvah, she's not forbidden anymore. But all these other people, you're always forbidden. It's permanent. So there are some achronim. There are some achronim who say that Nida is an erva, And there are some achronim who say that Anita is not an irva. It's a case where a forbidden sexual relationship and you get kares, but it's not that it gets kares because it's an irva. It happens to be a separate case that has the same punishment, but it's not an irva. And let's say a nafkamina between them would be, lo aleinu, but if they would say, if someone would say, if in going back to the beginning of the Masechta when we talked about Yehar Vayavor, the three cardinal sins, if a goy would say, go with that married woman or with your sister, or we'll kill you, you get killed, and you wouldn't do the avera. But if it would be an unmarried woman who's not otherwise prohibited to you, but she's never gone to the mikvah or hasn't gone to the mikvah recently, so she has the status of Anita, if they say, go with her or we'll kill you, it's not clear that you should be killed. Because since there's no other erva involved in that situation, if nida isn't an erva, it's just a case where you would have a punishment of kares. It would not be a case where you would give up your life. That's nafkamina between if nida would actually be an erva or not. Now, this Mishnah, from the fact that it lists here, makes it sound like it's an erva, but you don't have to say that. It's a case where you have kares. That's why the Mishnah lists it. The Mishnah explicitly is listing of cases where you get kares, and nida is a case of kares, but it's a little different than the 5 previous cases that it mentioned, or however many cases the Mishnah mentioned. But it was mentioned because of kares, not because it's an erva. Okay, the Gemara says, Hani naros psulos islahu knas ksheros lo. So the Gemara asks a question from a strange wording of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says these are the maidens who have knas. If the case of ones or mafata, seduced or they were raped, they get 50 shekels. So does that 50 silver pieces? So does that imply that a regular kosher Jewish girl who it happened to doesn't get any money? That's what it sounds like. It says these are the naros who have knas, and it only listed people that are not kosher Jews to marry other kosher Jews. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, this is what the Mishnah meant. Elu naros psulos sheish lahem knas. These are naros who have yichus problems, who have pedigree problems, and they still would receive the 50 shekel fine. If someone raped or seduced a mamzeres or a nesina or a kusis, the two dots will continue the middle of Chavtes Amud Aleph. Nara in Ketana lo. So our Mishnah said Elu Naros. These are the maidens, and again we've said that Nara is a stage from approximately 12 years old when the girl develops physical signs of puberty, and she is a state of naros for 12 years, so for 6 months. So once she became a nara, she's now considered an adult, but there's a 6-month span where halachos have certain halachos, like this particular thing, the V'nonos Sulfat that we're talking about, and that lasts for 6 months, and after the 6 months, she's called a bogeres. Actually, we kind of had something, I think, that back on Daf Daled or Hey, when we learned about we don't do this anymore, but in the time when dam, because now anytime a woman bleeds, we consider it nida blood. There were different halachos for a bride if she was a katana or a nara or a bogeres, of how many days. We learned that around Daf Daled or Daf Hey. So we didn't talk really about the different categories of nara, katana, nara, and bogeres, but that is a different halacha for that's related to nara, katana, bogeres. So who's the opinion that only a nara gets the 50 silver, and a katana, a girl younger than 12, would not? Rabbi Meir. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Rabbi Meir. This is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Titani, because we learned in a brisa, Kitana mibasiom echad biat shetavish deisar seish lahem mechar ve'ein la knas. Kitana, a minor girl, from 1 day old until she develops 2 pubic hairs, she could be sold as an Amma Ha'ivriya of the female Jewish slave that we read about in Parshas Mishpatim. And if someone would rape her or seduce her, they would not pay knas, which is the 50 silver pieces. And from the time that she develops the two pubic hairs, meaning that's the sign of puberty halachically, until she becomes a bogeres, which is 6 months later, if she would be raped or seduced, the man would pay the 50 shekel fine, and she's not allowed to be sold by her father as an Amma Ivriya, as a slave. Diva Rabbi Meir. This is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Shahaya Rabbi Meir Omer, Kamakom Sheish Mecher Ein Knas, Kamakom Sheish Knas Ein Mecher. Because Rabbi Yehuda held if the father can sell her, she doesn't qualify for receiving knas for these 50 coins. And if she would get the 50 coins, if someone would seduce her or rape her, ein mecher, she's not of an age where her father could sell her. But the Chachamim said that a young girl, a minor girl from 3 years old in one day, until she becomes a bogeres, which is 6 months after she has puberty, yesh la knas, she has knas. So the Gemara wants to say knas in mecher lo. So that implies that if she would be raped or seduced and lose her virginity through that, the man would pay the 50 silver pieces, and she wouldn't be able to be sold either. So again, the Rabbi Meir's age was from 1 day old until she reaches puberty. And he holds, so in that period, she could be sold, but if she would be raped or seduced, the man doesn't pay the fine. But from those 6 months after that point, from that point for 6 months, she would get knas, and the father can't sell her. The Chachamim's opinion here is if from 3 years old in one day, so once halachically she's no longer, if her hymen would be ruptured, she's no longer considered a basula. That's the age, 3 years old in one day. So the Chachamim said, yesh la knas. If she would be seduced or raped, the man would have to pay the 50 coins. So the Gemara says, knas in mecher lo. That makes it sound like the father is not allowed to sell her. He'd only be allowed to sell her when she's younger than 3 years old and one day. So the last two words on Chav Tesam Aleph says, lo. No, that's not what the Chachamim mean. Or knas in mecher lo. Knas in mecher lo. Knas, yes, the 50 shekel fine, yes, but they wouldn't be allowed to sell her. That doesn't make sense. It seems that a father is allowed to sell his minor daughter until she would become a nara. So the Gemara says in the last word on Chav Tesam Aleph, Ema af knas b'malko mecher. So when she could be sold, if she would, in an age where she could be sold, which is until she's around 12 and develops the sign of puberty, so the father could sell her, and she would, the man would have to pay the 50 silver coin fine if he would take away her virginity by raping her or seducing her. Rashi points out that the father is even allowed to sell her as a baby from 1 day old, but because in between her birth and 3 years old and 1 day, an act of making her lose her virginity wouldn't halachically make her be not a virgin, because we would say that the hymen would regrow. So the machlokas between Rabbi Meir, or the difference between Rabbi Meir's opinion and the Chachamim's opinion is, can between 3 years old and 1 day and 12 years old, according to the Chachamim, there is knas, and according to Rabbi Meir, there is no knas. So from the fact that our Mishnah said that the nairos have knas implies that only a nara has knas, but a minor younger than 12 doesn't have knas, this is Rabbi Meir's opinion. So that's what the Gemara just said. So that this Mishnah is with Rabbi Meir's opinion. So Chav Tesam Beis, we're in the middle of the first line, 29b1. Vahani b'nei knas ninhu. Are these girls, even if they're mamzeres or nasina or kusim, would the man have to pay the 50 coin fine va'amai. Why would they have to pay the fine? Ikri kan velosia isha ruyala. Because the psukim say that they should be married, shouldn't we learn that he has to pay the fine if they could be married and he declines to marry them? In these cases, a regular kosher Jew is not allowed to marry a mamzeres or an asina or a kusis. So why should he have to pay the fine? Since he can't marry her because there's a pre-existing avera to marry her, he shouldn't have to pay the knas. So Amaresh Lakish, Nara Hanara. So Reish Lakish says, it says Nara, and Hanara 3 times in the psukim. So that's in Devarim. He say, Tiyim ta'ish nara besula shirla oraso tvasav shechavima v'nimtzau v'nasana isha shechavima lavi hanara chamishim kasef. Wait. So those psukim, though, so Nara is said twice, but we're learning from the fact that because the Torah said that the man found a Nara Basula, she's already a Nara. Why did in the next pasuk it said La Aviha Nara, the father of the Nara? We already know she's a Nara. So the fact that it said Nara, Hanara, we actually is 2 things to make a drasha from. One is from the fact that it has to mention that she's a Nara, even though we knew she was talking about a Nara, and because it has the definitive hey, the maiden. So we have 3. It's as if we have 3 times that the pasuk says Nara for us to make a drashas from. One is for the context of the pasuk, and one would include cases where they would not be allowed to marry each other by a regular negative commandment. For example, if the girl, let's say, was a halala, or she was converted when she was more than 3 years old in one day, and the man who did that to her was a Kohen, so he's not allowed to marry her because that's a lav. It's a negative commandment. And one pasuk includes that even in a case where if he would marry her, it would be a case where they would get kare. So, like our Mishnah mentioned, his father's sister or his brother's wife, or things like that, he would still pay the man would still pay the fine. So that's Reish Lakish's explanation of why he would have to pay, even though he's not allowed to marry her. So because it's as if the Torah only says Nara twice. It says Nara once and it says Hanara. So we use 1 Nara for the context of the pasuk, 1 Nara for a case where for them to be married would be a regular negative commandment. Still, he would pay, and the hay or Hanara, we learn 2 things from. The other thing we learn is that a case of where for them to be married would be a kares, he still pays the 50 shekel. That's Reish Lakish's answer. Rav Papa says besula besulos habasulos. That's in the pasuk in Mishpatim. It said v'chiyafata ish besula, when a man will seduce a virgin, asher lo rasav shechavima morim merena lo isha imayin yamina vilositalo kesev yishkol kamar habasulos. You have to pay the amount of the virgins. So he's using the pasuk in Mishpatim about the seducer, but it's a similar answer. The Rav Papa says besula besulos habasulos chalagufe. One usage of the word besula is for the context. V'chad lisui chayved lavin, and one includes a negative commandment, where they would not be allowed to marry just from a negative commandment, but not a death penalty of based in or of kares. And one habasulos or basula is teaching us that even though there'd be a kares that they're not allowed to be married, he would still have to pay the 50 shekel. So now the Gemara says, Rav Papa my time alamer Reish Lakish. Why doesn't Rav Papa learn like Reish Lakish? How come Rav Papa learns from the pasuk of the seducer in Mishpatim and not from the pasuk of Ones in Kiseitze in Devarim? So Rav Papa says the Nara Hanara that Reish Lakish uses, we need those psukim to learn a different drasha like Abaye taught. The Amar Abaye said, Ba Leha Umesa Pater. Shnemer v'nasan Lavianara. Lavianara v'lo Lavi Mesa. If she would have died after he did what he did with her, it's not that she died because of him, but if she's no longer alive by the time the case comes to Beis Din, he doesn't have to pay the 50 points because the drasha is he gives it to the father of the Nara. So only if he's still the father of the Nara, but not if she has passed away in the meantime. Reish Lakish, my time Amar Papa. Why doesn't Reish Lakish? Why does he use the pasuk in Kiseitze of Hanara? Why doesn't he use the pasuk of Besula and Habesula in Mishpatim like Rav Papa did? He needs that pasuk for a Gzera Shava. Now remember, Gzera Shava is where the same word or the same root is used in two different cases. We say that the halachos by this case apply to the other case also. So Gzera Shava literally means an equal pasuk. So if the same word is used in two different halachos, if there's some type of tradition to there's a tradition that you got from your Rabbi that we're supposed to learn halachos from each case, from these two halachos. You should take the a halacha from case B or from pasuk B to pasuk A because they use the same word. So Reish Lakish needs to use Besula for a Gzera Shava. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, Kesef Yishkol Kamar HaBesulos, silver he shall pay, like the mohar, the going rate for Besulos, Shehezeh Kamar HaBesulos, that what he has to pay is the amount that the Besulos get, Umar Besulos Kazeh. And the amount that the Besulos get, that the virgins get when they get married, is like this. Because in Kiseitze, it doesn't say how much money he gets. The man has to pay to the father. Excuse me. In Kiseitze, it says 50 coins, but it doesn't say. But by the seducer in Mishpatim, it doesn't say. It just says Kamar Basulos. So we use the Gzera Shava that the case in Shemos, the seducer has to pay 50 shekel, just like the onus, the case of the rape over here in Kiseite, because we're at Utfasav Shechavima, he grabbed her and laid with her. So halachically, the Gemara calls this onus, and so onus is the word that we use for rape. So that's why these two cases that we're talking about, the pasuk in Kiseite is onus, a case of rape, and the case in Mishpatim is mefata. And again, I guess the common denominator is in both of those cases, he's taking her virginity away. For Reish Lakish, Nami Mibalech Abaye. So Reish Lakish also needs the teaching of Abaye. Abaye says that if the girl would die before the case would come to Beis Din, the man doesn't pay the 50 shekel to her father. How does Reish Lakish know that halacha of Abaye? For Rapapa Nami Mibalech Gzera Shava, and Rapapa also needs the pasuk that Reish Lakish uses. He needs Habesula in Mishpatim that Reish Lakish uses to show that the Mishpatim, that the Mora Basulos is really 50 shekel, to learn it out from the case of Onus. They each need each other's halacha. So how are they going to learn it out? They don't have another pasuk to learn it from. Ella Shita Kraik Sivi. So we're going to combine the two parshas of Mefata and of Onus, and we're going to have 6 words all together to make drushes from. Nara, Nara, Hanara, Basula, Basulos, Habasulos. So in Kiseite, we have Nara and Hanara, and the Hanara we're learning 2 drushes from because we already know it's Nara and because of the hey, the definitive hey in front of it, we're learning two things. And in Mishpatim, we have Basula and Habasulos. So altogether, we have 6 psukim to make drushos from. Trey legufayu. So one nara, one basula is for the context of the pasuk itself. Chad lechad Abaye. One we learn Abaye's halacha that the onus only pays 50 shekel if the girl is still alive when they come to Beis Din. V'chad l'gzera shava, and one is for the gzera shava that both cases pay 50 shekel. Aisru loy trey chad l'surei chayve lav and v'chad l'surei chayve prisos. And we have 2 extra psukim because we're combining these psukim, the 2 parshios. So we have 6 times. So then one of the extra nouns, or either basula or nara, includes that in a case where they would be forbidden to marry each other just by a regular negative commandment, he still has to pay the 50 shekel. And one is when they're not allowed to marry each other because there's a kares punishment if they would be married. He also pays the 50 shekel. And it's coming to exclude the following opinion of a Tana. The Tanya, because we learned in a Brisa, Isha, she will be to him a wife. Shimon HaTimani Omer, Shimon HaTimani says, Isha sheyesh la havaya. This is only in a case where he's allowed to do kedushin with her. Yesh havaya means that if he would give her kedushin, the marriage would take place. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says, Isha ru'uya lekaima, a woman who he's able to keep her as a wife. Now, perhaps it's important over here. I don't know if anyone says it, but in Mishpatim, when we said Mahor Yim Harena Lo Leisha, Unkelis translates Mahor Yim Harena as Kayama Yekaime Leila Intu. So I don't know if Unkelis is intimating the pshat here of Shimon ben Manasseh. So this point now, what the Gemara is saying, Rashi points out, is that we're done talking about Rav Papa and the Reish Lakish, but now we're just going back to a statement of the Mishnah in general. The Mishnah says that a mamzeres and etc., his sister or his aunt, he would pay the 50 shekel. But this machlokus between Shimon HaTimani and Shimon ben Manasseh, they would hold that in some of these cases in the Mishnah, the man would not pay the 50 shekel fine. So what woman? So according to Shimon HaTimani, if kedushin would work, so Rashi explains that in cases of kares, it's actually machlokas in Yevamos, I think. He mentions it from kedushin, but we're going to talk about it actually in the Gemara. According to Rabbi Akiva, people who are just in a regular negative commandment, they're not allowed to be married. If they would get married, the kids would be moms. They don't have to be married. The kids would be moms. We don't pass in that way. We only pass in it's a mamzer if there'd be kares or misas based in. But in the cases where their union would be a punishable by kares, if he would give her kedushin, it doesn't matter. He'd give her a ring and say Arev Mekudeshesli in front of Adam and everything. It doesn't take any effect. She is not married at all. So Rashi says that the machlok between Reb Shimon HaTimani and Reb Shimon ben Manasseh is lo sia leisha, doesn't mean sia from the word that kedushin would actually take effect, or would they be able to stay married? Which I'm pointing out, Shimon ben Manasseh actually fits in exactly with what the uncle says. So the Gemara says, "My benayu." Well, what's the difference between someone who kedushin wouldn't even take effect versus someone who you're not allowed to stay married to? What would be a case that it would work to one of them and not work to the other? Reb Shimon. Reb Zera says, "Mamzerus u'nesina ika benayu." The difference would be a case of mamzeres or nesina. Lamanda amar yesh b'havaya hanami yesh b'havaya. If the opinion is kedushin would take effect, if you would marry a mamzeres or a mamzer would marry a regular Jewish woman, in both cases, kedushin would take effect. So it's not a chiyuv kares or chiyuv mesis basin to marry a mamzer, but it's a negative commandment. Lo yova mamzer b'kal Hashem. But Lamanda Amar Ru'ya Lekaima, but according to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, who said that if they're not allowed to stay married, that's the exception. Ha Eina Ru'ya Lekaima. You're not allowed to be married to a mamzeres. So that would be the difference. That so again, the Gemara said that our Mishnah is excluding this Tana. So basically, we're saying that our Mishnah said. So we said the fact that it said Elu Naros holds like is like Rabbi Meir's opinion, and then the fact that we mentioned Mamzeres and Asina, etc., that would exclude Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, because according to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, since you're not allowed to stay married to her, I mean, if you gave her kedushin, the kedushin would take effect. She would be considered a married woman and would require a get. But so since according to Shimon Hatemani, the marriage would take effect, there is knas for a let's say for a man who raped a mamzeres. But according to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, since they're not allowed to be married, I mean they could get married, but they couldn't. But it's an avera to stay married. He couldn't stay married to her. So according to Shimon Hatemani, there would be no knas in that case. So our Mishnah does not accord with Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Well, Rabbi Akiva. So now we're mentioning Rabbi Akiva's opinion that I just mentioned a minute ago. Rabbi Akiva the Amar in kedushin tofsin b'chayve lavin ma beinahu. According to Rabbi Akiva, kedushin does not take effect even if there's a negative commandment. So, for example, if a Kohen would marry a divorced woman, that's just a regular negative commandment. There's no death penalty or kares, but because there's a negative commandment, according to Rabbi Akiva, the kedushin doesn't take effect. We don't pass it to Rabbi Akiva, but that's his opinion. My beinaihu. What would be the difference between Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh and Shimon Hatemani? Because according to Rabbi Akiva, in a case where there's just a lav, and to marry a mamzeres is just a lav, there is no kedushin either. So according to Rabbi Akiva's understanding, what would the difference between Rabbi Shimon Hatemani and Shimon ben Manasseh be? Would be a Kohen Gadol marrying a widow according to Rabbi Simai. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brayso, Rabbi Simai Omer min hakol osa Rabbi Akiva mamzerin. Any negative commandment, and the people had a union, even though there's an avera for them to be married, they would all be a mamzer. But Rabbi Simai says there's one exception in Rabbi Akiva's halacha. Me'amana leKohen Gadol. If a Kohen Gadol would marry a widow, a regular Kohen could marry a widow, but a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a Kohen. Is not allowed to marry a widow. So Rabbi Simai holds that Rabbi Akiva would say that in that case, even though there's a negative commandment, the kids would not be mamzera, and the marriage would take effect. Sharei Amar Torah lo yikach v'lo yichalel. In the beginning of Emor, when it talks about people who the Kohanim can't marry and the Kohen Gadol can't marry, it says you cannot take, which means you can't have kedushin, v'lo yichalel, and you shouldn't desecrate your lineage. Hilulin hu osev ein osem mamzerin. So because the Torah says by a Kohen Gadol marrying Almana, he will not make a defect in his lineage, or he won't profane his lineage. Rabbi Simai holds that Rabbi Akiva learns that in that case, the Kohen Gadol would make his son a chalal, his kids chalalim, if he would marry an almana, but they would not be mamzer. So a Kohen Gadol marrying an almana is an exception to Rabbi Akiva's din, that even though there's a negative commandment, normally there would be a mamzer, but there's a special gzeres hakasuv that in that case, It will be a halal only, but not, so he won't be a coin anymore. It'll be a halal, but he won't be a mamzer. So, according to Rabbi Akiva, the difference between Rabbi Shimon HaTemani and Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya would be an Amar l'Kohen Gadol. So, according to Rabbi Shimon HaTemani, they could get married, but according to Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, they couldn't be together because they'd make halalim. So that would be one category where if the Kohen Gadol was seduced, but how could we imagine that case though? Should be an almana from before the age of 3. Oh, Rashi says that even though the Mishnah said that it was a Kohen Gadol to an almana, Rashi says it would also be the case of a regular Kohen to a divorced woman. So if somehow there'd be a widow and she would still be a basula, she would still be a virgin, and the Kohen Gadol seduced her, the Kohen Gadol would pay 50 shekel according to Rabbi Shimon HaTemani, but would not pay the 50 shekel according to Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. I'm just having a little bit of difficulty saying how would she be a widow but have a presumption of being a basula. Okay, whatever it is. So then the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yeshov Damar Bav and Nitzuach al Akiva ben Yosef. Let us be victorious, or no, the word netzach would be victorious, but this called tzavach in Aramaic means yell against. So let's complain and yell against Akiva ben Yosef, because according to Rabbi Akiva, there'd be a lot more mamzerim. As Rabbi Akiva holds, or the second to last line of Chavtes Amar Beis, Shai Amar Kol She'ein Lo Bia B'Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. If it's not a permitted union, meaning even if it's only a negative commandment, the kid is going to be a mamzer. My benai who? So according to I guess Rabbi Yeshovev didn't have this exception of Rabbi Simoy. Rabbi Simoy held that there was one exception, or two exceptions: a Kohen Gadol with a widow, or a regular Kohen even with a divorced woman. But it seems according to I guess Rabbi Shovev argued on Rabbi Simai, and he held that there was no exceptions to Rabbi Akiva's rule. My Benayu, what would be the difference between Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya and Rabbi Shimon HaTemani's opinion? Yika Benayu, the Gemara says there is a case between them as we turn to Lamed Amar Aleph, Chayve Aseh Mitzvah Vedomi. If there's someone for which there is no negative commandment to marry, there's just a positive commandment. So if you would marry them, you would be in violation of a positive commandment, but there's no negative commandment. And that would be marrying someone of Egyptian descent within 3 generations, or Edomi, or it could have said Moavi also, even for, Edom is also like Mitzri for 3 generations. Ammon and Moab was 10. It didn't mention Ammon and Moab. It mentioned Edom. So the pasuk says you can't marry that. It doesn't say that you can't marry them. The pasuk says after 3 generations you can marry them. So if you married them within 3 generations, you violated the positive commandment, but that doesn't make it a negative commandment. So in those cases, Rabbi Akiva would agree that it's not mamzerim. So according to Rabbi Simoy, not Rabbi Simoy. So according to Shimon HaTemani, they could get married. According to Shimon Manasseh, since they're not allowed to be married, even though it's not even a losa say, they couldn't stay married. So this works to Rabbi Yeshovev if he rejects Rabbi Simai, which is what I said. Shaper, then would make sense. Amar. But if he's saying his own opinion, independent of Rabbi Simai, because if you take his words literally, if they can't come into a kedushin, the kids of mamzer, that would include even this case where there's only a positive commandment for them not to get married, or mitzri and adomi. So my benayu. So then, what's the difference between Rabbi Shimon HaTemani that they can't get married and Rabbi Shimon Manasseh they can't stay married? The Gemara says ika benayu ba'ulo l'kohen gadol. The difference is a case of a woman who is not a virgin who married a kohen gadol. So according to Shimon HaTemani, they can get married, but according to Shimon Manasseh, they couldn't stay married. So that would be the difference. So Maishna, why is a non-virgin marrying a kohen gadol different than, let's say, a mitzri marrying a Jew? The Gemara says the Havile Aseh she'eno shava b'kol, because that's considered a positive commandment that's not equal to everyone. Everyone is prohibited. Every Jew is prohibited from marrying a mitzri or an adomi, but the prohibition against marrying a non-virgin person does not apply to any Jew except a kohen gadol. So this phrase, well, the Rambam actually in Perkei Beis of Chosuz Rabbi uses the opposite. He says, "Havile lav she'eno shava b'kol." So it's a slightly different situation, but it's the same idea. So since only a kohen gadol is prohibited from marrying a non-virgin woman, so that's an exception to all the rules. Just a couple more lines. Amar Rav Chisda hakomodim b'val anida shemeshalim knas. Everyone agrees that if he raped or seduced a nida, he pays a 50 shekel. So nida is an exception to all other cases, marital cases or non-marital cases where you get kares, is because in all those cases you could give $100 million, a platinum ring with the queen's diamond, whatever it's called, and with witnesses and everything. Kedushin doesn't take effect, but for a nida, the rule is the marriage does take effect, because the nida is gonna be able to go to the mikveh and not be a nida anymore and be allowed to be married to you. So you're allowed to marry a nida. Now the Rambam's opinion is you can't have chuppah on your nida, but you could get married. Because you can marry a nida. So according to Shimon HaTemani and according to Rishon Manasseh, the man would have to pay the 50 shekel if the girl was a nida. Okay, then we'll leave it here. Lafuke Nefoni ben Hakana is going to go back on the Mishnah. So far we said that our Mishnah, the fact that it's Nara, is according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and then mentioning Mamzeris and Hasina, we had this whole discussion. It excludes Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh's opinion, and then we had some subcategories of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh's opinion according to Rabbi Akiva. So that's what we're talking about, and then we're going to continue next time that the Mishnah doesn't follow a certain opinion of Rabbi Nechon ben Hakana. That's what we're going to hear Hashem do next week. Any questions? Okay, have a good day.